Hello again. Oh, thank you for sticking with me. You need a medal. I'm Nick Meanwell, and this is the Maverick Diaries, making a Maverick, or at least how to make a crisis out of a drama. The Making of a Ghost of a Chance, subtitled. Available on all good bookshops. Actually, it's not available. It's sold rather well, actually, and it's on Amazon now. And there will be a hard copy available with pictures. But I'll give you details about that later on. Thank you again for getting in touch. It's fantastic. I mean, this is such a weird time as I'm recording this. I don't know when you're watching it. Hopefully life's, returned to what we might call normal now, and you're happy and you're well. I had an email from John, it was, who said, I saw you at the Edinburgh Festival. You mentioned Henry V Lion of England, but you did a version of Hamlet. That's right, I did. So this is all written and recorded and was not edited. A stream of consciousness. I did it in 1997 because we'd won 4 awards for this play I wrote called A Ghost of a Chance, which is fairly unusual for us being a small, community-based theatre company. And the idea was that I would write this diary and then release it. We'd bring it along, finish it on the night before the first night of Ghost of a Chance, and then bring that along. And it was a kind of an unedited, unabridged, raw, rough version of how we got the play on. And that's what we did. So what you're hearing now, of course, when I wrote this in 1997, I hadn't. And so you must have been at the Edinburgh Festival in 2018, then I'm guessing. Because I've written a thing called Hamlet, Horatio's Tale, which is a one-person version of Hamlet. With, I say one person, Sir Derek Jacobi, very kindly, lovely man, Derek Jacobi. He did the voice of old Hamlet. And I've also written a 4-person version of Romeo and Juliet, footballing version, based on Aston Villa and Birmingham City. And if you're a Midlander, you'll know why. But anyway, we return to 1997. Thank you very much again for your support. Let me know what you think. Press the like thing and subscribe as well, although... I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. Oh, yes, and someone did point out as well, Angela said, is that a picture of Hamlet in the background? Yes, that's what I meant to say. It's a poster of Ken Branagh's Hamlet when he did it at Stratford a few years ago, directed by Adrian Noble. Loved his Rogan peasant slave speech. The movement was fantastic, yeah. And that's a carry-on poster. And that's television. That's a guitar. I play the guitar very badly. And this is an Aegis. Oh, no, anyway, we'll carry on. Okay. Let's return, excuse me, to the Maverick Diaries. I'll just take some lubricant. These were all written late at night in 1997, so why change the habits of a lifetime? Friday, the 30th of May, 1997. John Slater returned from holiday with his new friend Lisa, a ballet dancer who we actually ended up giving a job to when she auditioned for us a few years ago. John read the first instalment of these memoirs. He didn't throw the specially purchased just for him, with love, car roof rack at me, so I presumed it was okay. But no time to write now. I've booked John Napier, boy, and Tony Harley, man, actor, filling in for Paul Henry, and the Midlands Arts Centre, the MAC, to read through the second draft of the script I've done. I booked the MAC from 3 o'clock till 7 in the evening tomorrow, and this throws up 2 huge problems. 1, England versus Poland starts at 7 p.m. 2, I've not written the second draft of the script yet. 3, John Slater and I talk about going to the Dirty Duck in Stratford-upon-Avon because it's a beautiful sunny evening. It's pure fantasy. I know I'm in for a night of scripts, cold tea, too many fags, and a bit of aggro off me missus for leaving things to the last minute. Saturday, the 31st of May 1997. As above, happened. I print out 3 copies of the script at about 5:30 in the morning, 5:30 a.m. I tried to tidy things up, but I know that the babysitter in the place still has 3 names. I can't be bothered at this time in the morning to go through and check. Nah, John and Tony will cope. I get to bed at 6:15 in the morning. My girlfriend grunts at me, looks at the clock, groans, and goes straight back to sleep. I can't say I blame her. I'm up at 11:30 a.m, off to the custard factory in Digbeth in Birmingham to see another youth group. There's one boy there who seems to have a presence and the right look, as though he could be the son of Paul Henry. But it turns out he's performing in a show on the day of the audition, which will be next Saturday, and his youth group won't release him for an hour. I have to decide if it's worth trying to reschedule the auditions, but not now, as it's off to the MAC for the read-through. John and Tony arrive, and for the first time, John Slater, free of the nightly demands of pub theatre and recharged, having returned from the highlands of his alma mater in Scotland, is able to sit in on the read-through. He doesn't know it yet, but I want him to read in the voice of the ghost. I have a slightly surreal experience. We're banging through the first act when my concentration starts to wander. I suddenly notice John Napier, the boy's arms. He's wearing a short-sleeved T-shirt, and I'm sure I can see like a downy covering of dark hair. Dark hair? Does this mean he's growing up? John Adams, the director, has opted for a boy to play the part of the boy. Not as obvious as it sounds. We talked about the other option would be to get a young-looking adult actor to play down. So it naturally followed we need the boy to be as young as possible given the licence restrictions. I also thought the play would be more horrible with the boy, a son, rather than a daughter. So one of the lads at the Midlands Arts Centre, the youth group, called Cian, was cast as the baby in the family in a production they took to the Edinburgh Festival. One of the lines in the play has his slightly older sister standing over him and handing down some food, saying, "The smallest portion for the smallest of us," or something like that. All well and good, but Cian's biologist decided to throw a spanner in the works on that one. From the start of rehearsals in May to the final performance in September, Cian's voice broke and he grew 8 inches. His elder sister had to pass the food up to him, and it would not have sounded unnatural if the boy's slightly elder sister had commented on the fact that her younger tiny brother had not had a shave that morning. So back to John. I find I'm concentrating less on the play and more on his appearance. I mean, it wouldn't be a disaster if he did get the part and then spurted up, but I hope some of the horror in the play will come from the fact that the entity possesses a young boy, and, John will hate me for saying this, with fairly angelic looks. I find I'm looking at John. Fortunately, he's concentrating on the script during all this, but I've mentally got him with his arms in rugs, looking like a grizzled and hairier version of Brian Blessed. When John and Tony hit on a new bit of editing, I did him a script and they both start to fly again. Suddenly, the bearded, grizzled, giant, hairy brute of a man with a bass voice that could destroy foundations of huge buildings with a single note becomes, once again, young John. I resolved to mark the script at the point where this flight of fancy began and ensure that an audience does not undergo a similar experience. Tony Harley, standing in for poor Henry, is producing some very fine acting. Tone the Phone Cabone, as he's affectionately and illogically known, came to Maverick almost by accident. On occasions, I'll try to run stories in the local press looking for local actors. We're a Birmingham-based company, so we should encourage Birmingham local talent. Most people in whatever branch of showbiz tend to turn to London. I hope one day to try and redress that balance a bit more. Before I produced a play called Strippers by Peter Turson at the Beelsley pub, we ran a story in the Evening Mail, the local paper, looking for local actors. We had about 8 people respond, and with 2 exceptions, they were a very, shall we say, strange group. It wouldn't be fair of me to go into too much detail in case any of them read this, but suffice it to say, I was more than a little tired at dealing with some of the acting misfits that Birmingham had to offer. And then I came downstairs at the Beelsley to seek my final auditionee of what had been a very tiring day, and saw this bloke who looked like a cross between James Dean and a choir boy, drinking a pint of Guinness and smoking a roll-up. He had a vulnerable terror about him. Dutifully, I did the introductions and we moved upstairs to the room in which I was auditioning at the pub. It was Tony, of course. He performed Skin Lad from Road, and surprise, surprise, he was very good, and a definite antidote to everyone else I'd seen. He got a part in Strippers, and he's been in a few shows at the Beelsley for Maverick Theatre now, including Sexual Perversity in Chicago and most recently Reg in Up and Under. Summer, June 1997, another new month. So I've just watched a film, Tom and Viv, with the lovely Miranda Richardson and that other bloke Defoe or something. But I'm so in love with Miranda Richardson, I'm blind to any other performance. I checked to see if she has hairy arms. It's another slightly bloody sad film, to be honest. Tom and Viv is about the poet T.S. Eliot and his wife. Not surprisingly, she's called Viv. It's their story, and a pretty sad one it is for the Viv of the title. She ends up being committed to a lunatic asylum, and it turns out that her only problem is what my mum would have called an overactive imagination and a hormone imbalance. Oh, my mother, by the way, counts me as one of the sufferers of an overactive imagination. Yeah. Although I think my hormones have always been okay. and I don't think my family have ever tried to have me certified insane and sent to an institution, although I need to be a bit careful about this statement. Even though I am obviously very near perfect, I'm aware of, how shall I say, having given my parents, particularly my poor mother, an interesting life. How? Well, 2 quick examples. My first day at school. I was born in August and was therefore cursed to be the youngest child in the year throughout my school life. So I started school at barely 5 years old. My mom takes me to Miss Eden's class at Wheelers Lane Infant School. Now, Miss Eden was a dear, sweet woman who I'm sure was at least 150 years old. My mom picks me up from school after the first day, and the conversation goes something like this. Mom: so, how was school, Nick? Me: oh, great, yes. Mom: well, you're a very grown-up boy now, aren't you? Me: yes, I am. Mom: so you had a nice time, did you? Me: oh, yes, I did. Mom: so you're looking forward to going again tomorrow, are you? Me: tomorrow? Oh, no. Today was very nice, but I'm not going again. I was as good as my word, and as a result, my poor mother spent the next 6 months strapping me into my sister's pram and wheeling her prisoner to school every morning. The frail Miss Eden and Mrs. Hennigan could be seen at 8:55 a.m. each day dragging, and I mean literally dragging, a sobbing 5-year-old up the ramp to the door of the reception class. I was a big lad for my age as well. For some strange reason, once I was inside the front door, I knew I was beaten and just got on with being a school kid, and I never tried to run away. I just saved my energy for the next morning. So I wept all the way to school, and my sister Fiona, who's 14 months younger than I, used to weep all the way home from school because she wanted to stay with me. I wasn't bad, I just didn't want to go to school. Excuse me. I like to think it's because Mum had made such a comfortable home life for us. Plus the fact that my sister and I were very close and had never really been separated until the education department stepped in. Years later, I found some letters my mother had written to various mothering magazines, desperately appealing for some help or advice with her strange youngest son. But she dealt with it on her own, with Dad working all hours. Poor Mom. The things kids get up to. I wonder how his particular behaviour would have been dealt with today. I can't help but think the system may have rallied round Mom and not left it to her and the diminutive Miss Eden. The second example concerns me leaving home at the age of 16. Now, that in itself is not too bad, but I left home at the age of 16 to live with a woman of 38. Another trauma for dear Mum, and a story that I think perhaps should be left for another time. So back to Tom and Viv. It reminded me of an experience when I was working at BRMB, the main commercial radio station in the Midlands. I was doing production on the mid-morning show with another presenter called Nick Meanwell. Nick is in Holland now, I think. At the time, our ratings were rather good, and we were filling 5 mornings a week with that euphemistic mix of music and conversation, so typical of local radio in the early 1980s, when the rules stated that by law you might be a commercial station, but you also had to broadcast speech, religion and classical music. Nick and I started to get lots of appeals from organisations to make PAs, public appearances. If you were clever, you could make more money from your PAs than from the radio station, but I've always been a soft touch and I could never resist an appeal from a charity. I think much of it came from sheer amazement that anyone would think my presence would make a difference. Les Ross, by the way, who still does the breakfast show on BRMB, sorted me out a few years later when I began presenting shows in my own right, but again, that perhaps is another story. A hospital in Hatton near Warwick had asked us to come to an event they were holding. It was a hospital for people with mental problems, and they wanted the 2 Nicks to open their event. Yes, quite. I know exactly what you're thinking. I did quite a few events at that time with Meanwell as the 2 Nicks. It was a sort of unrehearsed double act, and I always came off worst. If it was a carnival, it was always me who ended up in the stocks, while Meanwell threw wet sponges at my head. During one event with the then world judo champion Brian Jacks, Nick Meanwell disappeared from the stage completely when he was supposed to do a demonstration event with the athlete. No one could find him, so I ended up filling in, being the stooge for Brian's stage show. I suffered 2 broken ribs. You could tell which of the 2 of us had a degree, can't you? Yes, Meanie was no fool. So we arrived at the hospital and did our usual "I declare this fair open" stuff. For once there was nothing around that could damage me. The patients were all fairly elderly. And it was obvious, very obvious, that the hospital was a very happy place. The head geezer was showing us around the hospital when we came across a little party on one of the wards. A bunch of patients and staff were gathered around one elderly lady who was sitting in a high-back chair. It was her 90th birthday. She'd obviously prepared for the event and was dressed in her Sunday best with some small pieces of attractive jewellery. There was tea in cups and saucers and a fruit cake sitting on top of a cake stand. There were doilies and white napkins, and the woman, Alice I think her name was having a grand old time. The hospital had obviously made an effort, and it was heartwarming to see that Alice was receiving all this care and attention. Say what you might about the state of the NHS, you cannot criticise the staff. There were warm smiles everywhere, and the little party was genteel and gentle. I had a brief chat with Alice. She was obviously quite institutionalised, and she told me that she'd been in Hatton Rock Hospital for over 70 years. The nursing staff encouraged her. One nurse said, "Oh, we always make a fuss of Alice. She's been here longer than anyone else, and she's very special to us." Alice beamed with pride and happiness. She showed me the brooch her daughter had bought her sometime in the 1940s. After a while, we left the little party, and I could understand why the staff were so fond of Alice. She was lovely. One thing bothered me, though. I couldn't understand why Alice had been at the hospital for so long, particularly given her daughter's obvious affection. Was there some complaint that had not manifested itself while we were talking to her? I asked the doctor. Could he tell me? "Illness?" he said. "Oh no, there's no medical reason for Alice to be with us. She's still here because we are her life. She's been here so long, she'd find it difficult to function outside the institution." Having opened the fate, I felt I could question a bit further, but I still wasn't clear on the situation. So I asked, "But why did she come to the hospital in the first place?" I asked. "Well, I've seen the records," the doctor said. "She was certified and committed under the Lunacy Act by her mother." This sounded a bit dramatic. "The Lunacy Act?" I retorted. "What was the problem? What did she do that was lunatic?" "No," said the doctor patiently. "You don't understand. Alice has never had any mental illness, but she became pregnant at 15. "And?" I said. "And that's it," replied the doctor. He shook his head sadly. "She got pregnant and her mother had her committed. She gave birth to her daughter here at the hospital. The child was adopted and died of old age 2 years ago. Alice has never spent a night away from here since she was 15. She has no mental problems. She just got pregnant." The two Nicks were very quiet on the drive back to Birmingham. Very quiet.